All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to kick it off with our first panel today. We have a super interesting topic and a rock star group of panelists. The topic for this panel is usability and bringing blockchain technology to the mainstream. This is sort of one of the big questions that faces us as an ecosystem right now, along with scaling, is how do we make these products easy enough for your mother or your aunt to want to use? A lot of great insights here with our expert panelists. Our moderator is Ryan Selkis of Masari Capital. I'll hand it over to Ryan.
Masari Capital sounds good. We might have to spin up a new investing arm. I'm Ryan Selkis, founder of Masari. We're a crypto data company, and here to talk this morning about UX. And I learned that the title of the panel had actually changed to "Why Your Big Idea Will Fail." So we're trying to get it a little bit more urgency to the topic. I got a great panel here. We've got Sam from Wire, Simona from Bounties Network, and then Charlie and Kate from Ideas by Nature, a local development and design shop right here in Denver. So, I think we agreed we wanted to kick off because people talk about product development as kind of a catch-all term. Charlie, why don't we start with just a quick definition and how you guys explain product development to your clients and folks that are trying to think through this hard problem of bringing their idea to an actual customer.
Sure. I hope everyone can hear me. So product development, I think, is really a question about how to create a product that your customers will care about. That's kind of the very simplistic way of looking at it. And I think product development is this overarching umbrella that underneath it you'll have everything from product design to user experience, market research, testing, launch, basically all the stages to bring a product from concept or idea to the marketplace and beyond. So it's a pretty big term, and that's probably the most simplistic way to describe it. Thank you. So at Ideas by Nature, we're a product company that specializes in building products in the blockchain space. So you have obviously all the technical considerations, and I think many in the audience are very focused on the technology and think that's their great idea, is a technology innovation, which is this whole space. And actually no one really, eventually when we get the masses of people coming to this, care that it's blockchain. They just want an experience that feels easy, that replicates what they're used to already, and hopefully is something better. And that's what the challenge we all have in this room to bring to the market is something better than we have today.
So there's really two components here when you think about crypto. There's product development in kind of the traditional centralized company sense, and then there's planning for this distributed future where many of these networks will ultimately not be controlled by a single entity. Sam, you're at Wire. It's a company that provides a centralized solution. Simona, Bounties, polar opposite. So maybe Sam first, and then Simona can kind of speak to the two different challenges of product development, both in the traditional sense, in interacting with this decentralized ecosystem, and then actually building one of those networks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, for us, we started very early on in the space, and there weren't decentralized solutions. And like we've seen a lot of change in the ecosystem, and like more and more decentralization is becoming, that's what we're all here to talk about today. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of problems that need to be solved with decentralization. For example, regulation. That is something that is very hard to do in a decentralized space, and that's sort of why you need some centralized entities within the decentralized space to help sort of chaperone some of these new products that should they be regulated, should they not be regulated? There's a lot of questions there, and that's something that we do and we help a lot with, is just helping people with regulatory problems. And that's why you need some centralized services within the industry, I think.
think in terms of building a product, and again, with Bounty's network, we went live to mainnet in 2017 with a product that looked horrendous. But what we wanted to do was really get that feedback and get those users onto the platform so they would tell us. Did that button make sense? Did the notification that a transaction is pending, was that clear enough? Was it not? Was it confusing? Was it not? And from the perspective of building something that is easily accessible to anyone, that is the biggest challenge in terms of the onboarding piece. That is still one of the key problems that we have in the space. But in terms of broadening access, it is definitely happening. I mean, what we've been seeing in the past kind of year and a half has been...
Lift your mic.
So,
Sometimes if you cover it, it gets feedback.
so yeah, but it's moving in the right direction.
So let's talk about some of the specific... The mic's got louder, yeah. Let's talk about some of the specific challenges. So it's kind of a tried and process with more centralized alternatives. You succeed with your customer set or you don't. With decentralized networks, you've got multiple constituencies to think about when you're designing these systems, or you can scale for a little while and then have some existential threat to the network, and then you've got these coordination challenges if you want to upgrade. How do you guys even begin to think about tackling some of those long tail challenges with some of your customers? Or does that not even come into play until the idea has reached some critical mass, they've developed some type of traction? At what point does that switch flip in the product development cycle and the ideation process for what challenges come next, if you're going to be successful with Bounty's network, for instance?
So I'll, at least from my perspective, I'm very focused on user experience, so what the end user sees and how the end user is experiencing the product. So when you have an idea for a product, you essentially have a hypothesis that this is what people want. And the longer you wait to test that hypothesis with the people that are going to use it, regardless of the challenge, the more expensive it will be to fix it. So how you kind of tackle problems that may occur, you test. Well, what happens if the network slows down? Well, let's try this error message. Let's test it with users. Let's see how they respond. Very easy and cheap to test a paper prototype. But the longer you wait, if you launch a product without any kind of testing, all of these problems, regardless of what they are, become very expensive and timely to fix. So how we kind of tackle that is from the discovery process, from the first inkling of an idea, you identify, okay, we have this, this, and this. This might be a problem. Let's test it. We have this idea that users may like. Let's test it. We want to ensure that, sure, our mothers and aunts, but also our fathers and children and brothers and grandparents can use it. Let's test it with them.
And to answer your question, Ryan, about also, one thing about product development or product design in particular, it's not going to solve your business problems. It's not meant to do that. It'll solve your customers' problems, which will ultimately end up benefiting your business. So there is the business's strategy and its go-to-market strategy and all the regulation hurdles it's got to face. But product development is really meant to focus on your product and the experience that those customers will have, but in an iterative way. So as the market changes, you keep iterating on that design to take account for what's happening, new problems that exist that you have to resolve through design.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, when we redesigned our Bounty's Network Explorer in September of last year, we very much based it around all of the feedback that we had gathered. And, the fact that we made it fully responsive on mobile was, again, one of the main reasons, because the feedback that we were getting is, well, I'm not always going to have my laptop, and especially if you want me to complete bounties on the go, especially if, I need that same user experience that I have with Web 2 and the apps that I have on my phone. So it's very, very important to iterate and continue refining. That's key, based on feedback, continuous feedback.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, you mentioned it, that make sure that you design for iteration. So the original question, part of that was looking at how the Ethereum development changes so quickly, and if you want to keep your product up to date with the newest technology, you need to make sure that when you're designing your product, you're prepared to change the underlying technology that's underneath of it, upgrades, whatever coordination is going on in the network, you need to be prepared for that, and you need to incorporate that in the design of your product from the get-go, for sure.
So there's kind of three challenges that we touched on for product design in this space. So you mentioned the regulatory. I think there's the building on open protocols. That is something not a whole lot of companies have had to deal with, historically. And then you just have to grapple with the diversity of the user base, potentially the global nature of the user base, and the very different needs that they might have. Whereas you can, I think, go much more narrow if you're just focusing on an MVP for a very specific user base for a more centralized product. Having some of these conversations, it can get vague really quickly. I think we just set the table with like a good set of definitions and kind of like high level challenges. But for each of those three buckets, I think it'd be helpful to think of some of the projects or companies in the ecosystem right now that are doing a really good job or a really poor job. And there's going to be a bias to not crap on other projects, I'd imagine, so you can criticize generally if you want, but Brave specifically, just to put a little bit more of a tangible feel to what is good product development, how have teams that you think have gotten this balance right approached some of these challenges, and what can some of the folks in the room learn from that?
Well, I think it's a little bit hard to talk about who's done it right, who hasn't, because we're seeing the rewards are a little askew. There's so much of the foundation is fluid at this point, and people are, may have developed on one network or protocol and now realizing that maybe that might be limiting and having to think about retooling and create some interoperability. And I think that's, ideas by nature, the benefit that we have as a product development agency is that we have companies coming to us that are usually have a new idea that they want to bring to market. And so we get to look at the snapshot of what's happening with the technology at this moment, but then design through a product roadmap for being able to take advantage of the flexibility, what's coming. So changes, constant changes. Beyond, so I can't really speak to larger companies. I mean, you have direct experience from 2017, and those challenges you face, I think, and as well on your guys' side, anything that's been in the market for a while has seen so many changes. You've had to adapt quickly, and I think iteration is the key. Not to hit on that too hard a point, but that is a key piece.
Well, that goes to the building on open protocols comment. So I would actually argue that you probably can find teams, companies that have been intentionally flexible in terms of where they ultimately build in the future, because they're not necessarily wed to, say, Ethereum. Ethereum 2.0 it's a completely new blockchain, right? So I think some of the teams that are building on Ethereum right now, but that have preserved flexibility to move over to something like Cosmos or Polkadot, or even EOS, I think that's part of that's an intentional product design decision on the part of those teams to not wed themselves too early to any underlying protocol.
No, and I think that people across the space are sort of doing that. Most people, or a lot of projects don't want to commit to a specific protocol or a specific stack because we're in 2019 now. If you look at 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Ethereum was barely a thing. And if you were to plan to build for the stage that we're at right now, you wouldn't be able to. So I think that flexibility in the product design is sort of, that's by design, so that as the technology changes, they don't have to commit to a single technology long term.
And this is the main thing. I think we're all after this access to this new technology. And very much, we were having a conversation just before we came on stage, and having this interoperability and broadening access is very, very important if we want this technology to take off. I mean, when we created the Standard Bounties protocol, we were very much about this whole idea of interoperability. And we wanted every single platform that has bounties as a tool to be interoperable with every other. So this idea of being flexible and being open and allowing for that access is key, in my opinion, to adoption.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting is that when we talk about building the right kind of team flexibility, sure, we're working with the technology that is a moving sand dune. But I think it's also important to remember, you mentioned that third bucket, a global audience, is that if you build a product that's not made for people, it will not succeed. So when you are trying to address a global audience, you need to really think, it's like, do I want everyone to use this? Or do I want a specific kind of person to use it? Because if you start building a product for everyone, you may as well try to boil the ocean. Very few products out there are aimed at every single person on this planet. So it's like trying to balance yourself on a knife's edge. You have to balance a team that's flexible enough to deal with a technology that changes every day with regulations that may be out of your control. But also remember, you are building a product for people. In the end, there is a person at the end of your product using it to achieve a goal. And unless you meet their needs, no matter how great your product is, no matter how great it has solved some technical tricks, it won't succeed.
This is priority number one for any startup to get product market, right? Yep. It doesn't matter what stack it's built on if no one wants to use it. I think that's one of the criticisms that a lot of people had against many crypto projects, particularly in the bubble. A lot of really cool tech, no utility, no buyers, no users. We're starting to see that change, and part of that's just a function of time. But let's think about some of the products that have hit some semblance of product market fit. So crowdsourced fundraising. Pretty hard to argue that ICOs were not a killer app for Ethereum. I think what Maker's doing now, very interesting. That whole decentralized finance stack is growing by leaps and bounds. What we're seeing with prediction markets, you're seeing the kind of early product market fit. So that's table stakes, right? And it should be, I think, obvious to hopefully most of the young entrepreneurs in this room build something that people actually want. How would you rank order the next most challenging product development decisions that some of these teams need to make? So I rattled off a few. You got to think about scaling. You got to think about interoperability, the regulatory consequences. Do you guys see like the kind of glaring next biggest issue besides just finding product market fit?
I think, and for me, it's not just product market fit, it's ensuring a product that is accessible to everyone. Because right now we have a lot of mobile wallets out there that are perfect if you're a fully functioning, fully capable, both cognitively and physically human being. But if you have any kind of challenge in your life, they're unusable. So not only do we have to build a product, you have to then start to account for people that face different challenges in their lives. And it's not just challenges, it's people that may not speak English. It's people that may have different motivations. It's people that may value ease of use over security. It's the next big glaring problem is not just a market fit, but addressing the very human nature of people and meeting those needs while still keeping true to the ethos of the blockchain.
Yeah, and again, just the example that we were chatting about with our bounties for the oceans. We did a pilot in Manila where we incentivized people to clean up this beach and rewarded them with ETH. And we really went into that one and went, well, let's see what happens if we do this. And it was an incredible experience because we had 224 people turn up across 2 days. We were doing a couple of hours of cleanup over a weekend. And out of those 224 people, only 10% had smartphones. And out of those guys, 1% had jailbroken phones and they couldn't download anything from the app stores. And the only wallet that was available was Trust Wallet. And we didn't have any internet, so we had to hotspot them off our own phones and then download the app and then seed them with ETH for gas and then let them complete the bounty whilst explaining to them what it was and why this was maybe a new way and a new means of income for them. Keeping in mind that these guys were from traditional fishing communities and they were seeing fish stocks depleted. They weren't really making the money that they used to make because they just couldn't.
And you bring up a really good point, which is, we are so focused on the future, what's coming next, what's happening. We've got so many problems to solve right now. I mean, right here, when we're standing in the States and we're designing for other people in different communities, the fact that these guys are paying on a mobile phone per minute, and we're thinking, oh, we're going to have these long, drawn-out engagements of 5 minutes you're interacting with an app. Sorry, that's not going to happen in a third world country. There's plenty of problems. I mean, one of the big areas I think we have to address is private key management on mobile phones. And no one wants to be a custodian of private keys. And so that's a big, we got to solve things like that so that these applications that are coming online just have an easier way of handling what is already a basic behavior around email and security. There's a lot of ways we need to solve those tactical issues. And once we've solved those, then I think it's going to be, then it's like, okay, well, what's the platform doing now? What are these larger tech currents that we have to stay abreast of?
I think we could go round robin for the rest of the day and talk about all the things that are missing. A lot of things that are missing are so obvious just because it's so early. This is going to take 10, 15, 20 years to actually get built out, a lot of this infrastructure and then a lot of the applications. In terms of what's working right now, right, the building blocks that people can leverage. What's interesting about this whole economy, all of the underlying tech is open source. So anybody hypothetically can fork it, build themselves a new, really interesting business on top of those protocols. And that's all product and marketing, right? There's very little technical innovation, you could argue, that some of these teams need to grapple with because they can just leverage everything that's already underpinning these systems. So in terms of the building blocks that have already been built and brought to market and battle tested a little bit, where have you seen products that have just blown you away, right? So I want to give the audience some tangible case studies that they can look at and say, we should be trying to emulate XYZ project as we go to market and start with this very narrow use case that sits on top of this specific protocol that we know works, that's been tested in these alpha settings, and that we can really put a wrapper around and blow up with this one very specific use case is kind of like the narrow wedge to get to a bigger market opportunity.
MakerDAO and DAI. That was a huge problem, like Bitcoin, Ethereum going up and down, up and down, up and down. Stablecoins, the stablecoins before DAI were IOU tokens. Who knows if there's actually money sitting in a bank account that correlates to those tokens. Maker and DAI have provided a fantastic technology solution to that problem, and that's something that I think a lot of people should look at what they're doing there, and leverage it, because that is an example of a project that it solves specific problems, like I said, the volatility that Bitcoin and Ethereum have, and it enables developers to use stablecoins in a way, and that's, you can have $1 in the blockchain now, or effectively $1 in the blockchain. You couldn't have that before stablecoins existed, and to have a secure stablecoin is, that's what we need.
And it's a perfect example of the building blocks, right? Because you think about all the other applications that more recently have started to leverage DAI and that architecture. So I'd love to hear from you guys other examples.
Yeah, it's hard for me to come up with an example because I'm kind of perpetually dissatisfied as a designer I just look around and go,
None of the above
meh,
was not an
meh.
option, Charlie.
And it's
I'm
all-
going to
it's-
hold you to this one.
Yeah, it's financial products. I feel like that's a super crowded, noisy space. And the differences between financial product X and Y is so nuanced. This is where service design comes in. It's like if you have two coffee shops sitting next to each other, why do you go into coffee shop A versus coffee shop B? It's because the service experience is different. So those are really finer nuances. What I'm more interested in is how smart contracts are enabling certain services that we've come to expect where, like in law or real estate or energy, and we're building some of those products and ideas by nature with our clients. That's where it gets interesting. Where the people don't even need to know this is powered by blockchain. They're more like, oh, I don't have to use a lawyer for this? That's huge. And so our responsibility then is to create something that's a really great experience around that. Yeah.
Kate, I'm going to give Charlie a pass, only because you guys are colleagues, but now you're on the hook with coming up with something that's actually tangible and specific. Who's doing good work?
I have a very controversial answer to this. Again, my focus is user experience, so what is going to be the best building block to me is the one that's the most user-friendly. And with a caveat, CryptoKitties. Why do I think this is an important thing to look at? It was incredibly popular and incredibly simple. As long as you could teach, and this is the caveat, as long as you could teach someone to use MetaMask, using the site was a breeze. If you loved the blockchain, this was awesome for you. If you loved cats, also awesome for you. It was visually impressive. It was fun. It was cute. And there was a tangible thing in the end that you owned. And it did not matter if you cared about the blockchain. You could get the same love and, just a wonderful experience out of this. And I will say that's a good example of a blockchain product I like. I would also encourage people to look at other products you like in life. Do you like the way your refrigerator works? What can you learn from that? Do you like the way a specific app on your phone works? What can you learn from that, and how can you bring that great experience to the blockchain? That would be, I guess, my challenge.
And I think, I'm going to be a little bit biased on this because I've seen it happening with our product, and using incentives to get people into the space without the need for them to have a technical background or an in-depth understanding of what blockchain is. One of the things with the bounties for the oceans, and actually the very first bounty for this cleanup was created in partnership with Maker. It was so many of the people who fulfilled that, it was their very first interaction with a DApp. And people fulfilled it because it was interesting, because they were passionate about the environment, and yes, they went through the steps to download a wallet, get some ETH, and so on. But the feedback was, I really wanted to do that, and it was great. And I got my kid to do it, and this was actually really cool. They created a wallet for their kid, and then they went and did the cleanup and so on. And it's this engaging, learn by doing thing that I think is key in terms of a practical way of learning.
So I think I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm not sure. Are we up until 10:10? 15? Okay. So one more question since we are at a hackathon. Charlie, I'm glad you brought up the perpetually dissatisfied comment, which I think is probably common for a lot of high-level product thinkers, very aspirational. Folks this weekend are going to be building MVPs at best. Those are going to be the winning teams that build some type of MVP. What advice do you give to folks when they're trying to get the most basic version of their service or application out the door so that they're not totally glossing over product developments and design, and they are thinking about the actual end users, and it's not completely foreign for anybody to use or play around with. How do they get to the most basic application in the shortest amount of time so that they have at least a foundation to build the more aspirational product?
I would say just briefly, great respect to people that can build a product in a weekend. I know I could not. Pick one thing and do it very well. If your product in this weekend can do one thing and it's easy to use and it's easy to see, that is worth 1,000 times more than a product that is trying to do 500 different things. pick one idea, focus on that idea, make that idea work.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to that, is like just figure out what you want to do and don't worry about the details. Just focus on the one thing and deliver that and make sure that it's clear, you know what it is, and you can communicate it well. And if you have that, then you've got a good project.
And so just to repeat that, you guys just took my thunder. I have no idea what to say now. But I would just say when people say focus on one thing, let's decipher that a little bit more, which is take one user task. That's it, the red path. The red path is the most highly valued path that if it didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to describe the benefit of this idea. That's it, the red path.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's one of those things that, and having been on the ETH Global circuit for the past, so throughout 2018, it is that focus, picking one problem, one target audience, and going, okay, how do we solve this?
And if you don't, you will die. Just to wrap up the theme of the panel. Good luck.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you all for coming out early in the day.
Thank you.